Yeah. So, like, I guess to start with, like, do you guys want to introduce a little bit about Fabric? I guess like you did already, but more systematically about the fund, about the investment thesis, and yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, so do you want us to? And you're transcribing into text, or kind of
yeah, but I would edit.
Yeah.
Oh, you want the recording or what?
No, well, I mean, maybe, but I'm
just thinking that from my side, it's probably going to be very unclear on the recording.
Why is that?
My voice tends to not go very well on recordings.
No, it's actually pretty good.
Yeah.
I'll let you do the narrative, and then I'll jump in if there's specifics to add, maybe.
Yeah. So where do you want me to start? Like starting from the personal background?
No,
like,
it's on Fabric.
Yeah. Okay. Just trying to think of where to pick up the thread. Get it? That was an unintentional pun.
That's funny.
So, yeah. So in 2017, we kind of found ourselves, kind of half a dozen of us, basically, in an office in London, where a bunch of us were kind of a part of OpenOcean, and a bunch of us were kind of part of Firestarter. End of 2016, beginning of sort of 2017. Realizing, kind of as I just described to you, and that's the first time I've actually described it that way, that we had a fund in OpenOcean where we thought that we could invest in data-driven startups, dev-driven startups, and decentralization, but that turned out to be a little too deep tech for the investment thesis of OpenOcean, and a little bit ultimately token-driven for the investment mandate and the LPA for OpenOcean. And then on the other hand, we had this Firestarter vehicle that was able to kind of more arbitrarily invest at the seed stage and take the risks, the sort of deep J curve that deep tech investments have before they kind of kick up, and had the flexibility to invest in tokens, and it just became apparent that once there were like a dozen different investments that we didn't consummate, and some of them would kind of walked all the way up the aisle, as it were. That was getting a little frustrating, and there's Protocol Labs, Blockstack, Brave, there's some other AI ones, like 5.ai and Prowler and so forth, and so it just made sense that to create a dedicated vehicle, a specialized vehicle, because as I think we've seen it actually, specialization counts for a lot in this space, in the community, in deal sourcing, in understanding liquidity profile, and custody and staking, and generalized mining, if you will, and therefore made sense to kind of get a new vehicle, a new fund structure, and a sort of joint team together. And so the Fabric team came from that thinking process that I guess had begun in 2016, and kind of somewhere in the middle of 2017 kind of came together, and we were making those first investments. And then it's just taken a little while between then and this spring to extricate ourselves fully from OpenOcean and Firestarter.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
But you guys also did quite a bit of investment around the Web3.
Yeah, so between 20 deals in that roughly kind of just under sort of 2-year period,
right.
20 different investments. And, I'll give my quick cut on the kind of Web3 thesis, and then, and also I guess there's some commentary on how it's evolved since the back end of 2017 in our minds. But I personally got attracted to being on the investment side, kind of in 2009, 2010. Excited by the innovation going on in Y Combinator and right. Startups and Seed Camp and Andreessen Horowitz. But kind of for a few years, because I built kind of mainly B2B, quite fairly deep techy kind of companies. For a few years, I got romanticized by the idea of doing more consumer-facing things and doing sports fan networks and delivering wine and food and accessible stuff like that. I think I had actually the desire to be able to describe the things I was investing in at cocktail parties and have people go, oh yeah, I get that, or I use that, versus kind of describing, oh yeah, I'm looking at a natively sharded, layer one solution for distributed ledger technology. That doesn't normally get you as far in the cocktail sort of party circuit. Anyway,
funny. So
for 3 years, I kind of languished, and I refer to it sometimes as a kind of a Peter Thiel phase, because Peter Thiel tweeted, I need to go and check this, but he tweeted it. It was in a book, I can't remember. He said, we were promised flying cars, and all we got was 140 characters. It's like, where are the really truly exciting and fundamental innovations? And so, even though my second software company had been kind of based on the basics of expert systems and ontologies and semantic reasoning and so forth, when it was not fashionable to look at AI, obviously we started to see the renaissance of AI when suddenly it could spot cats in photos and stuff, and then with 2013 with my introduction properly to kind of Bitcoin, the thesis started coming together that you have 5G and Internet of Things, and you have these cryptographically infused data structures, and you have algorithms, and together that stack for us is Web3. It is the much or long heralded semantic web that allows software and software on machines to interact in a kind of arbitrary fashion, and hopefully use the vast quantity of data that's increasingly available to deliver amazing and highly intimate and human-centric services to both the human population and maybe to the animal population as well, and maybe just to the planet. And so that's kind of that was our Web3 thesis that it came together, for me at least, because I had a particular angle. Max wants to chime in.
Yeah, and I guess what we can add to that is that the evolution of the thesis over the past year or two, as to how we've seen the space evolve, has largely followed itself in going up the stack, going from layer one solutions to some developer tools now, and maybe in the next couple of years some consumer-facing applications or vertical-specific applications as well. But we've also seen an evolution in the so-called business models that we're seeing. So early on it was all about store value assets such as Bitcoin. Then you had smart contract platforms such as Ethereum, which required the native asset to pay for transactions. But then very quickly there was a bunch of different projects that decided to integrate a payment mechanism or payment token within their network, and assumed that if there would be traction on the network, that payment token itself would accrue value as well, which has far from proven itself to be true. And now today we see a lot of work going on around work tokens, which we're extremely excited about.
Work tokens?
Work tokens. So tokens that you would stake towards getting the right to provide work to the network. So you can think of them as a collaboration mechanism or coordination mechanism for suppliers of a network.
Right.
And that evolution is one that would have happened in Web 1, Web 2 as well, where you had different business models that were trialed and tested, and some failed, some didn't, and ultimately you have one or two business models that actually come out as quite successful and drive the whole wave. And we believe that now with these work tokens we might have one of those opportunities where actually one of the dominant business models has been discovered, although it's in the very early phases. But that's one of the aspects of the investment thesis which has definitely evolved over the past year or two.
Do you think any of the 2.0 participant would turn themselves into 3.0? I think this is a really interesting question to ask everyone.
Like Facebook, you mean?
Not necessarily Facebook, for example, Telegram. Ton. I'm not asking what's your view on Ton, but in general, it's because you mentioned about the business model, because a lot of the payment token, for example, they don't have a native traction, so it'll be hard. And then one of the way that Signal found themselves was like using mobile coin, so on and so forth. Like they already had the traction. So like, what do you think? A lot of the 2.0 like big platforms and stuff. Like, do you think any of them could become continue to play a major role in 3.0, or do you think a lot of them will come from the native 3.0?
It's famously hard to innovate, even in just terms of creating a new product from within a large organization.
Right.
One of the there's lots of books written on the kind of innovator's dilemma. Christian Clayton, Christian.
I know Chris Clayton.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, and then Jeffrey Moore wrote a book called not the Gorilla Game. He wrote Crossing the Chasm, Inside the Tornado, the Gorilla Game, and then a fourth one, which is about innovation within organizations and how you have to kind of actually totally ring fence the unit, because success metrics are entirely different for that part of the organization from everywhere else.
Right.
And otherwise, get problems with cannibalizing budget, and if you are successful, you're going to generate more revenue, then people get jealous, and then it's a whole. So I just mentioned that because it's hard enough creating a product that might have the same business model, but different, a lag to it. But if you're trying to create an entirely different business model, that seems, does seem incredibly hard to make the switch. So I don't know how they're thinking about that. For example, if you're maybe easier for Telegram, where I don't know whether there's many people looking over Pavel's shoulder and telling him exactly how he should or shouldn't do it, and that he can drop the metrics, for one business model and switch to a new one, or somehow, safely run the skunk works. Much harder, presumably, even though, of course, Zuckerberg's got a lot of control within Facebook. It's much harder for them, for him to do it, because he's publicly listed. And, I don't know how you transition from the ad model to, maybe he's got a phasing plan where he shifts to metadata, and then then he spins up the new, Libra-based network.
Teil davon. Ja, aber musst du runtersuchen.
And then does new apps on top of that make money. I don't know, but I think it's tricky, and hats off to Zuckerberg for making whichever year it was the year of blockchain for him, and really getting his head around it. There aren't that many leaders that are that agile or that young, I guess, and engaged in the technology.
No, it's definitely. I think over the next couple of years, we'll see a clear difference between some of the Web 2.0 players that are continuing with their traditional models, and at some point they might become maybe obsolete is not the right word, but might lose some of their dominance. And probably quite a small number of Web 2.0 players will try to make that transition, because as Richard mentioned, that totally or completely cannibalizes their current revenue models. Right. So it's a very difficult decision to make. And a good example to look at is in the gaming space, where a lot of the value that people have been assigning to using non-fungible assets or non-fungible tokens within games is that you could be able to port them from one game over to another, and actually have them fully sovereignly held by the players. But the whole business model behind games today is to have these closed ecosystem in which the game provider is the only entity that's able, or the game creator or developer is the only entity that has the ability to actually sell items, whether they are skins, whether they are swords, whether they are any item or piece of land, and that's their source of revenue. So if all of a sudden they open up specifically that part, it completely breaks their model. So there's very little incentives for those established players to change their business models. Actually, there's counter incentives.
Yeah, by nature, like company or corporation structure is always contradictory to DAO. So I was myself has been thinking about, do you think, well, this is a question for you guys and for myself as well. Do you think the company structure specifically will continue to exist while more and more DAO might become, I don't know, prevalent, or
I always feel like it's sedimentary layers, or kind of like nothing ever goes away. You've got new forms of organization that might be better suited to certain purposes, and once it's been created, or once the invention has occurred, then they can be deployed. And so obviously we're starting to see that, whether it be for an innovative way of funding a political campaign, or an innovative way for getting capital better allocated to, well, it could be a non-government using NGO stuff, or indeed investment. And kind of talking about this yesterday as we were floating around a little bit, where if you believe it's a better approach to capital allocation, and you believe that it's somehow a DAO can combine some of the scale and capital access of crowdfunding, but with the kind of judicious, due diligence and specific specialist insight of something like venture capital in a new potent kind of mix, then it should deliver some returns to a significant amount of capital that it will, the spigot will be opened, and then it'll become kind of an asset, a new asset class, or a new style of investment. It feels like that's possible, but I think it's relatively
far.
early. Yeah.
I do feel like it does come back to the question of business models, because if we can just organize ourselves to do collective actions for good, that will have certain impacts on the world, but won't completely change how business is conducted, because most people are revenue driven, or at least most corporations are currently revenue driven. And so coming back to this idea of the work token, that might fundamentally change the sort of current theory of the firm, where actually, instead of having a set of stakeholders that then incentivize a set of employees to actually come together and produce or to create productive work, you could have a network that is fully where all the stakeholders are effectively the suppliers, because they have an interest, they have a right to provide profitable work, which they do, and so they supply the network, but they also have the interest of the network in their going in their direction. So it secures the quality of supply being provided to the network, which can sort of creates a flywheel effect, where actually you have better quality work, more usage, and sort of creates a network effect in that sense. And so from that perspective, that's one of the types of networks that could actually change the current enterprise that we have today, because you can actually reach a much longer tail of suppliers that just generally wouldn't otherwise come to collaborate or come to work together.
The way we've thought about that, the work token makes it sound like it is a new software-driven instantiation of something that in a sense kind of existed before, the cooperative model, the mutual model, so we've seen, the point being, we've seen that can be effective. Applied to insurance, or to basic farming produce or whatever, it can work pretty effectively. I guess you could argue that sort of decomposed sounds like a terrible thing, but kind of disaggregated version of a corporation, but instantiated in software to make work more effectively than had been the case before,
right?
And extended, because like you could argue that you could have a cooperative of different suppliers who are rewarded for their participation in this new organization, but you can extend some of the benefits and rewards to the customers as well, through a similar concept to a work token, or membership token, or maybe they exist in both categories at the same time. But that doesn't mean that. Maybe it's an interesting point of debate or discussion, at least. It doesn't mean if you do that you have to have a decentralized approach to governance.
Interesting.
I mean, you can have a building society that is like a mutual, in the US parlance, a building society version of a bank that is entirely centrally run.
That sounds.
It doesn't have to be. I mean, I worked with most of them are that way. I mean, then nominally their owners are their customers, but generally speaking, the owners didn't vote about anything.
I do think in the future, like each individual could become a DAO. Like technically, not I wouldn't say a DAO. It's like there might be some sort of a platform, and then like large and small groups are like mutually connected to each other. It's almost like polka dots, that kind of thing. But I don't know. I just like
family becomes a DAO, I think, or kind of like.
Oh.
But in what sense are you thinking an individual would become?
Yeah, I was more thinking about no. Yeah, I think I didn't really express that well. I think it's more like a small group of people, like some sort of social customs or like social connections that have been like relatively stable in the past might be shaken. Could be. Like family is a very good example. Like, I mean, because like human nature, it's back then it was polygamy, or like not gamy, but like more like, you're not one-on-one, that kind of thing. Yeah. But that just like, kind of distracted ourselves from discussing this.
I think it's good to think back that it's good to get yourself out of the mindset of how things happen to have been the last couple of 100 years. The reality is that, this is back to the question of how do humans organize themselves, and that's been evolving for thousands, if not millions of years, and indeed you've got this kind of this nesting of interrelated organizational structures at different levels of scale, and depending on the scale, there are different organizational models, whether it be dictatorship or socialism or religion or whatever, that kind of seem to be effective. And then you can also, so if you can instantiate those different models with the appropriate governance, rules and restrictions and so forth, and economic reward model in software, which is kind of what it's all a DAO is, all a DAO is.
I agree.
Then yeah, why not do it that way? I was discussing with someone earlier how someone Russian, that you have that difference in terms of organizational structures, but you also have this. I think it was a Roman philosopher he cited who talked about the cycle within a given society as well. So you're like you might go through sort of chaos to democracy to oligopoly to kind of cycle through things, and there's a natural kind of
cycle.
Yeah, almost like the seasons, or like the pendulum has to swing back and forth. In an organization, it kind of naturally goes that way, and you hope it's not too drastic, but it's quite hard to just keep the thing still and stable because the system's so complex.
Yeah,
and it's only once the pendulum has swung far enough one side that people have enough incentives to actually try to swing it back into the other direction. But I think to the question of DAOs, actually, it might also be even more applicable, or if not just as applicable, to much larger organizations than just families. Because if we think back to how we've organizationally been structured in ourselves as humans for a long time, if you go back, it's always been to what extent can you create trust amongst larger and larger groups of people. So when you started off with indeed sort of small families and tribes, and then with urbanization, you had large cities coming together where people knew that a certain baker had a reputation of being a good baker and a plumber had a reputation of being a good plumber, and you could have a circle of trust between people who might have used him before, and that sort of created that link of trust where people could interact with each other and proceed with business. And now actually, if you can have that same level of trust, but not only in cities, but instead over the entire world, effectively, by having this digital incarnation or digital version of trust, you can actually organize yourselves as societies at a much larger scale via DAOs. So that might be the sort of extreme opposite of much larger sets of people coming together.
That's very interesting. Yeah, it kind of makes me think of like, I think DAO, it's way beyond. I think it would bring a lot of changes to the social customs, and also like how like people, because like at the beginning when people kind of created law, quote unquote, or code, like, you have to organize a family like one-on-one, and then, so on and so forth. It's easier to manage for the rulers, well, I tend to think that way. But on the other hand,
some of the family unit has existed because for purposes of taxation, or,
because
like you can understand the lineage and
exactly
organization through religion and so forth.
Or even like avoid social instability. To the sense that, like you don't want a lot of chaotic relationship between people across different people, so that like you want to have like use that as a kind of unit, like small unit to manage that. And with like to your point, you know, what we have right now and what we are facing could, you know, what DAO could bring could be more than, you know, just the governance, like, you know, the surface layer that people are thinking.
We sometimes describe that point that Max Decide One might get to as kind of the global village, the point where, you know, you can trust anybody on a peer-to-peer basis, you know, in the implicit way you do a member of a village or a member of a family. But maybe what you're saying, I think, is that because you'd think of a village probably as something that would have the family unit that we're used to, you know, resident in it. And there's like 100 family units in a village and whatever. Whereas you're describing going back to a kind of more chaotic state, which is like it's the global tribe, you know, where it's it hasn't, you know, you're. Again, what's the word? What is the word? Not decompose. You're deconstructed, I guess, probably deconstructing the society back to some more fundamental primitives, down to the individuals and how they might want to interact.
I actually don't know. Because
I'm certainly not qualified to give you a definitive answer, but I feel like we've gone down kind of a sociological, philosophical direction.
Yeah. That's actually one thing I do like about the blockchain like circle. Like people tend to think more than just the technology itself.
Yeah, well, and even more than just the business.
No,
yeah,
absolutely. But then, like, it comes to, like, because, like, our conversation, like, to some extent, it's related to investment. Like, because, like, there are people investing in a few, like, say, the protocol, like, what is the name? Not Moloch now. The one yesterday.
Meta Cartel?
No, Aragon.
Aragon.
I was like,
yeah.
I have it on my tongue. So, like, for those, what's your thought in terms of like investing in DAO? Because like right now, like whatever these have are more like, you know, the tools or, you know, the SDK. Well, not even SDK. I would just say a tool for people to organize the DAO. But then on the other hand, there are very few proven succeeded cases for DAO. So do you think it's needed at the moment, or like what's your...
It's back to this, I think we've been referencing obliquely this cycle that occurs where you know, an application arises and based on the available sort of infrastructure and building blocks, it becomes successful and then suddenly kind of the wave of success peters out.
Right.
And then, but there's maybe an idea of what the problems are, and then the next wave of infrastructure gets built, and then off it goes. And so, you know, yeah, we have seen versions of the DAO appear. You know, there's to greater or lesser extent, with more or less on and off chain governance taking place in these decentralized systems that have been, you know, built and already successful, and they've been harnessing the productive work of women, men, and machines to do something, so that, you know, successful. And now people have built these SDKs or, you know, and templates and have been speculating on what the next wave might be around, but it's never certain, and, you know, so there's going to be a lot of experimentation until something takes off, and it always, and sometimes the reason it hasn't taken off is because nobody's happened upon the right problem to solve, and sometimes it's because it's just too damn unusable to get off the ground, or some combination thereof.
It's also because at the very early stages there's just such big differences between the use cases of decentralized autonomous organizations. So if you take anything from Moloch DAO to Meta Cartel to Maker DAO, or even the original DAO, there's a lot of modularity needed in terms of the features, whether it's in terms of attribution, in terms of allocation of work, in terms of actual governance and voting, in terms of reputation, that there's not a set of standard sort of layers or product features that you can just put on as blankets and apply to any DAO. I think we're still so early where there's a lot of discovery as to what actually works, what doesn't work, and once we have a bit more confirmation around that, people might actually start using best practices, which then might indeed be baked into frameworks and tools for DAOs.
Interesting. I guess one last question, because I'm mindful of time. Not sure if you guys have other commitments.
I've got a panel starting I'm going to be there for the kickoff in 40 minutes. But.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I should probably just...
We can...
No, I think it's fine. Like, I've asked quite a few, like the ones that I wanted to ask, and also like we got to discuss, so it's good.
Bonus ones.
Yeah, so like, I mean, like now we all know there are quite a few, like all kinds of public chains, quote unquote. And right now, this year, like we have Cosmos and Polkadot, like, coming live. So what's the, I guess, like next 1 to 2 year, your kind of expectation of the whole field gonna be, like, with the two, I guess, like highly expected interoperability platform available? Like, what's your thought there?
I mean, so I'll punt something just to get us started, but I'm not sure that the fact that we got interoperable blockchains is something that is actually much of a burning need right now, or rather, I'm sure we'd find ways of kind of using it, but and I'm sure that in the future that these decentralized applications may well be formed from the composition of applications sitting on different blockchains that are suited to the particular purpose that those applications have been designed for. However, and I'm not sure that's what's blocking us from getting a whole bunch of adoption. But and as best as I have been able to appreciate the important differences between Cosmos and Polkadot, one aspect that seems that plays in Polkadot's favor is the fact that any new chain, parachain indeed, that bolts itself on, can benefit from pooled security, and that means that of the various hurdles to innovation that you have to get over when you're starting as a little minnow in the sea, that question of security is something that you can take off the table, and you just got to address the questions of getting great human capital and access to users and other aspects of innovation, but at least that one can be addressed. So that seems powerful, because it hopefully perhaps means that there'll be a rush of innovation of new chains that support particular use cases. We were just talking to some potential portfolio members to whom that might apply. So that would be my thoughts. I don't know
I guess Cosmos' counterpoint would be that enough of the larger chains would not want to pool their security with any other chain. So I do believe that in a future where every chain can be very highly personalized for a certain application,
right,
a lot of applications will want to have their dedicated chain, or at least build their application on top of a very specific chain that optimizes for certain parameters. And I think that fits the parachain model from Polkadot pretty well, because you might have certain parachains that optimize for speed of transactions, others that optimize for securities, others that actually just have better tooling. And so you have different applications that will choose different parachains to build on top of. And while there is actually a large dispersion of these different parachains, they all still have the benefits of that pooled security. So that's definitely the model that we've been extremely excited about over the past couple of years now.
Right, like to your point about, like one chain for specific use, I did thought about maybe some of like Web's more complicated game could have their own chain as well. I mean, sure. In the future it could be. But it's interesting to see like all these like highly similar POS chains are all like, still like, hanging there. So I don't know like how it will be in the next 2 years. So that's the kind of quote. That's the reason I was gonna ask you about the question. What do you think of like all these like coexisting chains, like their ending terms?
Well, if there's not a sufficiently distinct reason for a chain existing, then I suspect that they will get consolidated. Probably driven by the driving force, the network effects of developer community.
Makes sense.
But not that it's easy necessarily to consolidate developer communities. So it's probably not like you can go on a pirate raid and steal the community. They more kind of like sort of die through lack of oxygen and all shift across. But I don't know, that's interesting. I think some people are actually thinking about that in a slightly kind of Machiavellian sense, sort of building alternative chains. I think this applies to a few different projects in a manner that is kind of their ambitions are plausibly deniable, but ultimately their position is a bit of a smokescreen for their future global chain hegemony.
It was interesting yesterday at our event where we had a panel with Parity, Polkadot, and Keep, who had just announced TBTC. And you had Matt Longer from Keep sitting in between the Parity Polkadot person and the Cosmos IBC person. And someone asked, what's the end state? Is this sort of winner-take-all market, or will there be room for multiple base layer chains? And both Polkadot and Cosmos claim that they see a lot of room for collaboration, and actually they see their work as beneficial. And Matt from Keep, sitting between them, said that he actually clearly believes that there is a large opportunity for a winner-take-all market, but he won't comment any further.
But he'd keep them separate for the moment.
Keep them separate.
Boom. Glad you picked up on that thread.
Whoa. I figured that you like that. Yeah. No, I do think the substrate, I think this is good.